I got into the industry when I was 15 years old. It was incredibly easy to get into the industry, but there wasn't really an industry at that time per se to get into, at least not where I was. I happened to meet a young woman whose family owned a game company, and they were looking for somebody who was willing to play the games, memorize them, and then when people called up trying to figure out how to get unstuck in the game, to give them advice. And I was that person. So at the age of 15, my job was to play games, memorize them, and help people get through them. I was a living FAQ. Back in the 80s, there was so much to be interested in terms of video games. Like, I actually got to live through the explosion of arcades, and I remember walking into these dark rooms and seeing Pac-Man or Tron or Defender, just tons and tons of great games. And when they hit computers, being able to see things like, well, the Wizardry series, the Ultima series, lots of stuff by Nasser Jebeli and Serious Software, it was just a really dynamic time. I mean, like the rise of any new technology, especially any new technology that's used for entertainment. Oh man, it was an absolutely magical time for me. Having been in the game industry now for 37 years, I get asked a fair bit why I've stayed this length of time. I guess the average length of time people stay in the industry is 5 years. So for me, why have I stayed for 32 more years? And it's because I'm still incredibly passionate about games. Like I can't imagine doing anything else for a living. It still doesn't really feel like work. I still think in a way it's ridiculous that I get paid to make these incredible, hopefully incredible things. I love being around other creative, technical people. So I'm still incredibly passionate about it. Like, I saw the creator of The Last Guardian in the hotel last night, and I was just like, oh, there he is, because I loved that game. And I didn't say anything. I just kind of walked around him and went up to my room. But yeah, man, I'm still incredibly passionate. Like, my laptop's loaded up with games. I just loaded up my PS4 to play games. There's every Christmas, my husband and I play games. We do nothing for 2 or 3 weeks but play a ton of games. So yeah, I'm still incredibly passionate about it. There's not a chance I'll do anything else for a living. I will, my first job was in the game industry, and my last job will be in the game industry. There's not a doubt about it. My God. Nobody's ever asked me that question. That's great. I know, I love new questions, and I love questions that I never get. It's like, I don't know how to answer that question. Do I miss manuals? So yeah, I wrote a lot of manuals. Do I miss them? In a way, partly I kind of do. You'd have to at least be in your late 30s to remember when you would pick up a game box and you'd go, oh, this must be a good game because it weighs a lot. And I enjoyed, like when I would first get a new game, I would enjoy reading through the entire manual, and I certainly enjoyed writing them. It was my first time I had any kind of, let's say, relationship with, me and the gamer. And nowadays, when I'm trying to understand a game, so for instance, Stellaris is a game I'm trying to play at a functional level. And I find myself watching lots of Let's Plays or watching people Twitch stream it. And I think that, in a sense, has taken the role of what manuals used to do. And since most of our games are distributed digitally, manuals aren't necessarily that effective on a screen. A lot of times there's a PDF included, or you can download some kind of manual. You would still get a really small manual with your console releases. But yeah, I guess I do miss them. There was all kinds of stuff hidden in those manuals. I don't remember which game, but maybe it was Wizardry 5 that I put something in there like, if you see this, write to us, and the first person who writes to us will get some kind of surprise. I did that in one manual, and people actually wrote in about it. But yeah, so I guess I do miss them. Financially, I understand why they don't exist, but yeah, I miss them. RPGs, I started on RPGs back when I was 11. I played D&D, and I still have my original D&D white box, and it's, you know, it's beaten up because it went into a bunch of backpacks and it's all it's like caved in. But my affection for D&D translated directly to Wizardry, and then Wizardry I started playing Ultima, Might and Magic Bard's Tale, and it just kept going from there. And I remember with RPGs, if I look at, which it hasn't really occurred to me, like I'm super fortunate that I got in on the beginning of the digital transformation of RPGs and got to see things like Final Fantasy come to life, you know. And there was a time when it seemed to me like all the pillars of the RPG world were falling, right? So we're seeing kind of the end of the Ultima series, the end of the Wizardry series, at least in the Western world, Might and Magic, Bard's Tale, you know, they're all sort of coming to a close. And then this game that seemed to be like such a light RPG, Diablo, comes out and transforms everything. And so where I remember actually worrying like, oh, shit, you know, I'm an RPG designer, like what am I going to do for a living? Diablo just opened RPGs up to a ton of people. And then you see things like World of Warcraft, which further expands with MMO RPGs. And now, when we think about RPGs, they're not just specific hardcore experiences, although there's a good number of those as well. RPGs are starting to become a component of almost every game, where players can actually create their character, grow their character, that character gets skills and, you know, buffs their various stats in some ways. And, you know, I think of games like Borderlands that integrated RPG elements into an FPS. So RPGs are really finding their way into lots of different games. And the game I'm working on now, obviously, and not surprisingly, has RPG elements as well. Video games, because of the fact that they are video games, bring with them, we'll say, a degree of baggage. And that baggage is the assumption that they are for kids. And there are still some countries that if a game is not playable by somebody who's 15 or under, it is simply refused classification. So that's not something that's true of movies or certainly books or plays or many other forms of entertainment, but it's something that we have. That said, I feel like we're at the very tail end of that experience, or the very tail end of that period in games, because we're seeing games that are covering a lot of interesting and challenging ground, difficult subjects, serious subjects, and game designers are using the things that they need to use to convey those experiences. So I don't know what type of game I would want to make that I would include, let's say, the more hardcore ends of sex in it. Like, I don't know, it just wouldn't be relevant in the games that I'm making, as I expect it's not relevant for a lot of films or not relevant for a lot of books. But I definitely don't feel such a hold as I used to. And part of that, I think, is that because digital distribution has taken off, people aren't as hamstrung by those rating systems as they used to be. Rather, it's the platforms that they're distributing their games on that are really the ones saying you can or you cannot do this. But as a game designer, I would say at present I don't feel restricted. I don't feel restricted in my choices, at least for the games that I want to make. The Mechanic is a Message series of games, so there's 6 of them. At this point in time, I'm about 3.5 finished. The game that I'm working on now, I'm guessing I have maybe 5,000 more pieces to go out of 50,000. So it's a pretty substantial game. And it's, you know, it's interesting to me when people talk about them as controversial games, because they are games about historical subject matter. These things happened, and I am making a documentary about those things, except I'm making a documentary through game mechanics versus through film. And so what is controversial there isn't the situation or the fact that it's a documentary, it's the medium I'm using to express, the medium that I'm using to express express what happened, express the systems underlying these things. to me, as a game designer, it's the only way I really know how to express that. And I made these games because I wanted to see, could games do what film can do? Can they do what books can do? And the answer, the answer is yes, obviously. And when I released the games, the first of the games, in 2009, maybe. When I released the games in 2009, there was sort of this like, you made a game about what? But nobody really says that anymore. People contact me because they're doing research into whichever subject the game that they're interested in covers, and if anything, I much more often hear them lauded for being really the first game to take on that subject matter. I was surprised that they were controversial. I was surprised that people found it potentially offensive that games would take on documentary subject matter. I mean, what's offensive is what happened. That's the offensive thing. I just covered it in game mechanics. And I still feel very strongly about that, and I'm sure I'll do other games that are in that medium. I have always liked making analog games. I'm a very tactile person, so I want to touch and feel things and see how those things can fit into a game, because I started in analog games, and so the digital medium took that away from me. This is all I get. So it's a pleasure for me when I am able to actually work in analog again and put things together in such a way that they are, well, in some cases dangerous, like shattered glass, which is in my games, or smooth or rough, and all those things matter to me.